everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Brenna Jean, a future doctor, and today we're going to talk all about getting letters of recommendation for medical school. Let's get started. So when it comes to getting letters of recommendation, there are a few basic rules you can follow to make sure you get all of your bases covered. Now, generally speaking, most medical schools either ask for one letter of recommendation from a pre-med committee, or if your school doesn't do pre-med committees or you're in a major that they won't let you utilize that feature, then the alternative is 2 letters from science professors and 1 letter from another source. Typically, most schools either recommend or require that your other source be a physician, either an MD or a DO. Now, when it came to my letters of recommendation, I went a little bit over the recommended minimum, and I think the average number of letters that most students submit is about 5 to 6. So the letters that I submitted were: 1 was from my organic chemistry professor, and the only way that she would write me a letter of recommendation is if I got an A in both sections of her class, so Orgo 1 and Orgo 2. My second letter of recommendation came from my biology lab professor, actually. So he was in charge of the introductory biology lab courses, and then I actually worked as an undergraduate TA for him for about a year. So he knew me pretty well, and he was a great source for my other science letter of recommendation. Now, as far as my non-science recommendation letters, I actually pulled from 4 different sources. So the first one was from one of my engineering advisors and professors. Dear woman, love her so much. She and I had a great connection. She was actually the woman who helped me transition from one engineering major to the one that I ended up graduating in. I confided in her a lot throughout my schooling, throughout getting the pre-med courses that I needed, and just like working through the last 2 years of school. So she knew me very well. I also got a letter of recommendation from the director of a choir that I was a part of in school. And I really liked his perspective because it was a more non-academic perspective. He got to see me in more leadership roles. So he was another great resource to pull from, and he had known me since my freshman year. The last 2 letters that I got were both from physicians. So the first one was actually an OBGYN that I shadowed in Ohio. She was an MD, and I told her from the get-go, I would love to get a letter of recommendation from you, and it worked out. The second one was a DO. She was a family medicine doctor, and I also shadowed her for a little bit in order to learn more about her profession and get a letter of recommendation. Now, you might be thinking,
when should I start thinking about letters of recommendation and who I should ask?
Honestly, as soon as possible. You can never start thinking about it too early. So if you're a freshman or a sophomore and you already know, like, medical school is my thing, that's what I'm doing, start scoping around now for professors that you think would make really good letter writers or that you have a really good relationship with, so that you can start building up that relationship and they can get to know you on a more personal level as well as the academic level. Now, if you're someone like me who didn't decide to pursue medicine until a bit later, then you should definitely start thinking about it as soon as possible, because you have a limited time frame, and you want to make those relationships, even if they're a bit shorter, count a bunch. Now, what are ways that you can build those sorts of relationships? Well, when it comes to professors, you can email them a bunch with questions and thoughts, participate a bunch in class, but the best way that I found was attending office hours, because that's really the way that professors get to know you and how you think and how you work. And inevitably, when you're talking in office hours, things come up about you personally, your personal initiatives and goals, that can help shed some light on more of who you are as a person and not just who you are as a student. So highly recommend attending as many office hours as possible. Even if you already worked through the problem set, just pretend or just go visit and say hi. I know you probably didn't finish that problem set, so let's be honest, you need to go anyway. Prioritize it. Now, when it comes to physicians, obviously they don't have like office hours. So again, you can try emailing to get a good line of communication that way. You can always try meeting up with various physicians for coffee, getting to know them on a more personal level. But I think the best way to build relationships with people who are in the healthcare field already is to do things like scribing or work as a med tech or shadow, because it puts you in their environment so that they can see what you are like in healthcare, and they can ask you questions in real time about what did you think about that patient, or do you have any questions for me on the procedure that I just did, and it gives them a better perspective of what you might be like as a physician. So again, it's never too early to ask, especially if you ask up front. Let's say you want to go shadow a physician. When I shadowed the family medicine doctor, I said in my initial email, I would love to learn more about family medicine, see osteopathic medicine in practice, and get a letter of recommendation. I said that in my initial request, and that way, once I started shadowing, she was asking me questions throughout my shadowing hours that would inform her letter of recommendation for me and make it a better letter. When should you officially start asking people? I would say February or March of the application year. I submitted all of my applications in May, June of 2019, so I officially asked all of my letter writers to write me letter of recommendations in February of 2019. So it gave them plenty of time to write, to get any other information they needed from me, while still making sure I was able to submit my letters on time. Now, that being said, that's when I officially asked, but I actually asked a year prior, and that's because I knew I was going to be out of school for a bit. So we'll talk about more non-traditional routes or non-traditional students in a bit. Now, when you do that initial ask, make sure you have all of the information they need. So a deadline. I would recommend that they get things in by the end of April, because most applications, they open in May, so you want to have those letters already in or already ready to get sent to your application service so that you can start submitting to schools the minute the application opens. In addition, if you already know the types of schools that you're applying to, let your letter writers know. They can do a little bit of research on the school or the types of students that go there if they're curious, and better craft their letters that way. And of course, it's always better to be safe than sorry, so instruct your letter writers to provide their letters to your letter writing service or your pre-med advisors on signed official letterhead. Now, when it comes to that initial ask, do that in person. Do not do that over email. So here's kind of the recommended process, or at least this is what I did, and I found this to be recommended in other places as well. So once you've identified who is going to write your letters, send them an email saying, hey, I would love to meet up. When are you free? Can I come to your office? Etc. and so forth. Once you're in the office, that's your moment to say, I have loved being in your class, or I've loved shadowing you, etc. and so forth. I think that in our time together, we've created a good bond and that you have gotten to know me very well. Would you be willing to write me a strong letter of recommendation to medical school? I'm happy to provide you with anything that you need in order to do so, whether that's my resume or my transcripts, my personal statement, whatever you need. But what are your thoughts? And what I will say is, definitely be very humble, be very accommodating. If they need absolutely anything from you, or if they want to chat with you a bit more in person right then and there to get a better idea of your motives or your reasoning behind applying to medical school, give them anything that they need, but don't pressure them, because you don't want someone to feel pressured into writing you a letter, because it's not going to be as good of a recommendation as someone who is openly willing to do that for you. So do so in person. They're more likely to say yes if you do so in person, but it's also just nicer because you can have more of a conversation than you can over email. Now, if you're someone who gets really nervous when it comes to asking for things of professors or people who are a bit older or more established or whatever, just practice. Grab a friend. Say, hey, can you pretend to be this professor for me? I just really need to practice what I'm going to say. If it helps you, you can write out a little script for yourself and memorize it. I personally didn't do that, but I know some people just get really nervous when they're in front of people. So if you need to read from something, don't be afraid to do so. It can be a little awkward, but it makes sure that you get your full request out there. And just know that if you've been building a good relationship with this professor and you've known for like a year, a few months that this is going to be the person who's going to write your letter. Hopefully you have a good enough relationship with them that once you ask, you know they're going to say yes. Going to medical school is absolutely amazing, and people want to help you get there. Now, what I will say is asking well enough in advance is definitely the way to go. They're more likely to say yes if they have plenty of time to do so. Remember, professors are teaching classes, doing research, grading papers. They have their own families and lives to worry about. They're busy people. So you need to give them ample amount of time to actually go through a few revisions of this letter so that they can have something really great to present to your schools. Now, I mentioned giving them things that will help them write your letter. In addition to that, consider sending them AAMC's letter writing guide. This provides a full overview of the core competencies of what it takes to be in healthcare, to become a medical student, and it's just a really great resource for letter writers to reference as they're trying to figure out what specific skills or competencies they should highlight in you. I've linked that sheet down below in the description box, so please feel free to go take a look. It can definitely be of great help to your letter writers. In addition to the letter writing guide, don't be afraid to explicitly say to your letter writer, this is what I'm hoping that you can talk to. For example, that choir director that I told you about, I really wanted him to speak to my leadership abilities because at the time that I was asking him, I was on the leadership board for that choir. So I was hoping he could talk to my dedication to the group, my ability to lead and listen to others, work on teams, etc. and so forth. Comparatively, my organic chemistry professor, I wanted her to really talk about the academic rigor of the course, my ability to do well in that course, and really speak to my academic prowess overall. Just my ability to study well and work hard in order to get good grades, because that's an important part of being a medical student, is to be able to study and do well in your courses. And then of my physician letter writers, I really wanted them to talk to, could they see me in a career in healthcare? Did I have the empathy and compassion necessary for future doctors? Now, if you're a non-traditional student like me, or even more non-traditional than me, sometimes letter writers can be a kind of tricky topic. Now, if you're in school right now and you know you're going to be taking some gap years before you apply to medical school, still secure your letter writers now while you're in school, because it's going to be a lot hard to go back later and say,
hey, remember me from 4 years ago? Yeah, write me a letter.
Get the ball rolling now, get them writing your letters now, and they can just save it and store it away somewhere and then bring it back out once you're actually applying. Now, if you're someone who's been out of school for longer, say 5-10 years, one idea that I did have is that you can take some night classes or weekend classes in some of those basic sciences. It would be a really good refresher for you, and you can say to those professors from the get-go, hey, I haven't been in school for a while and I'm needing some letters of recommendation. Do you think you'd be able to help me out? If you have any more ideas to help out those super non-traditional students, put a comment down below. Let's help each other out here to get into medical school. Last but not least, be sure to follow up with your letter writers. So once you get into medical school, let them know where you're going. They'd love to see that their efforts helped you achieve their dreams. And of course, be profusely thankful. Letters of recommendation can mean such a difference in the application process because it gives that admissions committee a more personalized perspective of who you are as a person. And it really helps you get to the next stage, which is really interviews. So definitely thank your letter writers. Let them know where you ended up, because it's just a great way to circle back and close the loop on the whole letter of recommendation cycle with that person. All right, that's all I have for today. Hopefully I shared some information that was helpful. If you have any more questions on securing a letter of recommendation, you can either comment down below and I will reply to you, or feel free to DM me on my Instagram at BrennaJFutureDoc. Otherwise, like this video if you liked the content that you saw today, and of course, subscribe to see more just like it. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next Monday. Bye!